Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. Today we are talking overwintered allium options, from leeks to wallas to green garlic, and we'll take a mailbag question about hilling potatoes and what makes talking about farming so complicated. So let's do it. All right, welcome in everyone. I hope you all are doing well today. Of course, as always, a quick reminder that we like to see how well. So please feel encouraged to send us a 20-second farm video clip to farmermike@no-tillgrowers.com by uploading it to Dropbox or Drive and then share that with Farmer Mike. We just like to see how things are going on your farms and or in your gardens. And it's okay if it goes over that 20-second mark, but obviously, don't make Mike do a giant editing job. He's a busy dude. Anyway, love those and always look forward to seeing what you all are up to, good, bad, or otherwise. Also, by the time you hear this, there should be a new episode of the Small Grain Growers podcast up. So go check that out wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so let's talk about a crop you should be thinking about for next year. Now, that would be your overwintered alliums. I don't know why I said it like that. It could be everybody's overwintered alliums. So allium in this context just means anything in the onion and or garlic family, but also can mean, obviously, alliums like the flower, because they are pretty and fun to grow. Much of what you can grow over the winter will depend on where you are located, i.e. your growing region, but also a little bit your latitude, especially when it comes to onions. What infrastructure you have is also important, if any, like high tunnels, hoop houses, cold frames, etc., and the variety of whatever it is you're growing. For instance, in regions that are slightly warmer than my own, Kentucky Zone 6B, you might be able to easily plant wallas in mid-August in the field without any sort of row covering for over the winter months most years, whereas I would need to cover them for them to survive most years. So yes, let's go through some of what makes sense in the overwintered world in terms of varieties. And then in the second segment, we'll talk a bit about planting and protecting if need be. All right, so the first and most obvious overwintered allium isn't just garlic, but green garlic. Garlic is maybe the easiest crop we grow. We plant it in the fall. It has very few pests. It grows all winter, gets thick in April, flowers in May, and is harvested in June in hulls. As you go a little further north than us, the harvest date gets a little later and later, of course, with some folks up there in like Maine and Canada not harvesting garlic until like last week. I've done lots of shows on garlic, and we'll do more on garlic as we approach planting time, but less so on green garlic. However, green garlic is a bit of a different monster. It's planted at the same time as garlic, though it can be planted a little bit later, but it's planted more densely with cloves just 3 to 5 inches apart, so that would be like 7 to 12 centimeters, and is typically harvested well before bulbing, which in our region, harvest can start as early as April for green garlic, or if it's really thick and in a tunnel, you could start harvesting small green garlics in March. I'm a big fan of green garlic just as a thing to eat. It makes an excellent pesto. The young ones are nice grilled. You can use the whole plant, including the little nice green leaves, for stir fries and such. Big fan. Another potential overwintered allium in high tunnels or in the field in region 7 or above with minimal coverage and loose, well-draining soils is leeks. Now, to be sure, starting a leek now and hoping it will be ready in the fall is a hopeless endeavor. Overwintered leeks should be started in the early to mid-summer. They're a very long season crop. And then you plant them in the late summer or early fall and protect them as much as you possibly can from the worst of the cold. Usually one row of row cover like the AG30 or something will do it. But then they really start to size up in the early spring. And then as long as you harvest them before they flower, they will be some of the biggest, best leeks you've ever known and eaten or sold. Now, any sort of onion, including the walla, can be a little trickier. What we've had success doing in the past in Zone 7B, when we were growing down there, is sowing a walla type in mid-August and then covering them all winter with a row cover and keeping them weed-free all the while. They grow well and then start to bulb up around April and then get absolutely gigantic. I've never grown them that way and not had at least some of them flower, though, so you will have to be prepared to cut some of the flowers off. They're a biennial. They just think, oh, I went through a winter, which they did. And then they will start to flower because they think it's time to go to seed. So you'll need to be prepared to cut some of the flowers off. That will kill their storage capabilities just by removing the flower. But the walla types are meant to be more fresh eating anyway, so that's not a super big deal. You can put them in the fridge and they'll last for a while. Now, other onion varieties like reds and candies and shallots, etc., can often be grown over winter like that as well in regions like ours are a little bit warmer. But I personally have less experience with trying those, and I honestly just don't have a lot of incentive. I prefer instead to just sow them in in trays in January when we're kind of starting to kick back into the season. I'd rather do that than have to protect them in the field all winter like we did with the walla wallas. The value with the walla wallas that way is the size. A giant walla walla is something special, and it's kind of what people look for. I personally get plenty big enough onions just starting them in trays, so I don't really see a ton of necessity to do it otherwise. Of course, with all the onions, I'm talking about starting them from seeds. I find the sets that you can buy, they bolt just a little bit too easily for me to spend the money on and then try to protect them all winter, only to have them go to seed as soon as they can in the spring. Seeds are cheaper, though I should remind you to look at your day length in terms of your latitude, right? There's a clever little map on Johnny's that you can use. That's the one I would go to. Overwintering onions really requires warmer regions or tunnel space, and chances are these warmer regions are in shorter day length territory, meaning look for shorter day length onion seeds, and that will be helpful for you in shorter day length regions. With any direct seeding though, of course, your bed prep has to be on point, which, good news, is what we'll talk about next. So stay tuned. Have I ever said that before? That feels weird, but also nice. BRB, and stay tuned.
Hey nerds, Farmer Will here from the Narrow Path Farm in Ocala, Florida. Today, we're putting basil under the shade cloth, tomatoes by the trellis, and hoping that this Central Florida summer heat goes away soon. So let's do it. Much love, y'all.
Today's episode is brought to you by Holden Tool Company. Holden Tool Company is a family-run business specializing in high-quality hand tools and small batch manufacturing for growers of all kinds. They offer forged hoes, forks, scythes, sickles, pruning tools, orchard tools, and forestry tools featuring traditional European designs that are hard to find at ordinary garden centers. These tools are practical, durable, and made for people who typically do work by hand. Holden Tool Company provides thoughtful customer service, helping you choose the right tool for your body, crop, or task. Find them online at farmandgardentools.com and use the code NTG26 at checkout. That's farmandgardentools.com. All right, back to the show. Okay, so let's talk a little bed prep and infrastructure for overwintered alliums. To be sure, there is nothing specific you will need to overwinter alliums any more than you would need to overwinter basically any winter hardy crop. In the field, if you are in, say, 7P or something, just on the edge of where you could comfortably overwinter onions or wallas, in the field, row cover will be your friend. I like the AG30 or 9.9 ounce weight that I mentioned earlier for almost everything in the winter because I can always just double it up if I need to, but I just like that it's more heavy duty. Anyway, I like to use that, but I would double the number of hoops, if not triple them, if you're doing it in the field, just because any amount of snow that you could possibly get, or in our case, ice, could smash your hoops and then, smash the crop, which is less than ideal if you're an onion plant. Garlics, including green garlics, don't really need any covering, though I've found you can get your garlic a full 2 weeks earlier by growing it in a tunnel. The trick there being that it does still need those minimum 40 days below 40 degrees Fahrenheit to bulb up properly. In colder regions, that won't be a problem, but here it can be a little iffy if you're growing them in a tunnel. If you've ever gotten garlic that's just like one giant clove, that lack of cold could be the culprit. In that case, you may need to switch up your varieties or, try and make sure that it's getting adequate cold, which I don't know how you would do that if it was out in the field. You'd have to convince the weather to change, which is a tough task. For green garlic, though, it does not matter because you're not trying to get a bulb. You can try and speed that up as much as you want. Now, really what you want is nice, long, tall plants, and you may want to plant them a little deeper. That way you get that nice blanch on them. Now, on the planting side with all of these crops, drainage is going to be paramount. You don't want any crop sitting in wet, cold soil for 3 to 4 months. There is only so much you can do about that in clay, as I've learned, but this may be a situation where a thick compost mulch might be helpful to simply elevate the roots above the majority of the moisture. Leeks is where I find this is the most difficult proposition, having them sit in water. If you have dense soils like we do, a tunnel is going to be your best, possibly only option for leeks, so that the roots and stems are not just surrounded by water for the entire winter. Leeks don't love that. In the field, it is just going to stay a little bit too wet. In the tunnel, though, where you can choose the moisture, leeks can work, or if you're out in the field and you have like sandy soil, that may be an option as well. For weed control on things like garlic, mulches for the win, obviously. Hay and straw can work so long as you have a plan for the weed seeds, or compost mulch works fine too. And last year I used leaves, which was fairly successful. I did the pea cover crop thing last year, sow pea cover crop into the garlic. Then it grows and then winter kills and then mulches the garlic. And it worked okay, but that's how I ended up using the leaves, is I needed to mulch it. It's simply not thick enough as a mulch on its own. So I had to use some supplemental leaves to control specifically the purple nettle and chickweed that really, really wanted to come through. In other words, you'll need some supplementary mulch if you're going to use that winter kill cover crop with your garlic, or you may want to just have one on hand. And then for onions, again, that compost mulch can work. That's an option. And or just like a really good basic plan for cultivating all winter season. Really take your time preparing any beds you plan to grow in all winter. Broad fork if there's any compaction, fertilize it, reasonably. Get them weeds out, all the things that you would normally do for any crop, but especially in the fall where you're dealing with the end of the summer weeds and then the beginning of the winter weeds. So you just want to make sure to kind of get both of those. Otherwise, that's kind of the gist on overwintered alliums, though I did want to shout out our elephant garlic that we grow as an allium flower and we plant in the fall around the same time that we plant our garlic. It has similar needs and is similarly fussy, and then we just harvest those alliums in the spring and then the bulbs a few weeks later. The bulbs will be smaller if you let that allium grow. It's just like garlic. Like if you harvest the scape really early, it'll create a slightly larger bulb. Same thing with elephant garlic. But, a slightly smaller elephant garlic is still a comparatively massive garlic bulb. Those things are just large. And no, they are not more closely related to leeks than garlic, but you already knew that because you've been watching the show for 2 years. Almost 2 years. All right, let me know what else I should have included here on the overwintered allium front. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, what hilling potatoes teaches us about the nuances of farming. It's a big ask, but we'll find out. Be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Good Agriculture. If the season is picking up and the pile of receipts is starting to grow, you're not alone. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping so you can stay ahead of the mess before it piles up. They keep your books organized each month, help you understand what's coming in and what's going out, and show you where your farm stands so you can make better business decisions throughout the season. If you're behind, they'll help get everything caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. All right, back to the show. All right, so we're going to reach into our Patreon mailbag and see what we find. As always, if you'd like to get a question in here on the show, you can do that by signing up for one of our Patreon tiers at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I hope this show brings you, $2 worth of value per month, maybe $5. You can show that by joining one of our Patreon paid tiers. Then you can ask me a super specific question or a fairly general question or both, like today's excellent question from Patreon member Michael Buccieri. I think I got that right, Michael. Probably not, but I hope so. Who writes, quote, "There are so many ways to grow things and an unreasonable number of permutations." Hear to that. How does one take successful ideas and incorporate them in full or in part into their own system, i.e. I have no-till beds with wood chip paths that are almost level. How does one mound up potatoes in this situation without A, an abundance of compost, and B, disrupting wood chip paths? I settled on a hybrid root stout method, planting traditionally at about 8 inches, then appropriately covering with straw mulch instead of mounding. You speak about great topics. I think an even greater focus on how these topics can and potentially should be integrated into differing scenarios would benefit many. Keep on keeping on, end quote. All right, so great question here, and there are really two different themes in this question. One, navigating the unrelenting nuance of no-till and low-till gardening for people in a million different contexts, and two, how the heck to hill up potatoes without tillage. So there is obviously no easy answer to the first question. I mentioned this recently, but the reality with being a farm educator is that it's an impossible task. Sometimes the same problem can have two completely, if not somewhat opposing answers, as I talked about recently with the outdoor tomatoes. Someone in a dry California might be able to get away with a lower and lean system from a trellis in a field, whereas in humid Virginia, that it just may not be it may be a total waste of time because the amount of moisture will almost inevitably lead to blight on tomato leaves, which is why you see so many growers in the East Coast or in the humid Midwest growing their tomatoes inside of tunnels. And for as much experience as I have, almost 2 decades in, and as many people as I've spoken to about, growing in different regions, my knowledge base will almost always be somewhat limited. There are just too many different contexts and variables out there to account for all of them with every topic. Like there are people in my home state of Kentucky who grow on sandy soils that have significantly different growing experiences than I do in the same exact season. Anyway, let's take your potato question to illustrate this. Potatoes benefit from hilling for two main reasons, traditionally: soil temperature and reduction in greening. There may also be some benefits to drainage, especially in wet years, and weed control when you hill them. Now, are you ready for the unrelenting amount of nuance? Not every variety of potato benefits equally from hilling. According to some research, pre-hilling may actually be better than hilling during the season to reduce damage on the tubers and increase water infiltration. Hilling at the wrong time or with the wrong equipment can affect yield significantly on some varieties, etc. Then you have soil type, climate, soil approach, all the things. So yeah, nuance for days. Now, to your actual question about how to hill potatoes in a no-till system, you have two options really, especially with wood chips in the path. The first is to just keep mulching as the potato's growing, like it sounds like you're doing. Like that's a perfectly fine approach. No issue with that. That could be a carbonaceous mulch like straw or hay or compost or whatever makes sense the most in your context. Or alternatively, if the wood chips have been, down for a while, you could shovel them on top as a mulch, or use machinery like the rotary plow to throw them up there. Those half-rotten wood chips being thrown on the beds won't take a bunch of nitrogen, and they'll provide some amount of mulch, and then you'd have to replace them in the paths, and then you do the same thing for another crop next year. You just leave them there or whatever. That's how some growers use wood chips in the pathways anyway. It's kind of a sort of a composting in place method where in the spring you put the wood chips down, then in the fall you throw them up onto the beds and tarp it or whatever for the winter, and then the soil will do the rest. They'll just kind of break them down, and then you have a nice fluffy soil in the spring. So yeah, as always, there is no one right answer. Growing food is about examining your options and resources and making the best decision you can based on what you're working with. There are not many industries like that. Like if we all wanted to start our own Pokemon card store, we'd buy inventory, we'd buy display cases, we'd put prices on stuff, and we would rock and roll, and we'd look awesome. Growing food, it ain't like that. Anyway, was that helpful? I hope so. Otherwise, Monday, my friend, I think we're done here. The good news is that No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so you can donate to us to make sure there are more Mondays in our future. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Big thank you to Michelle. Big thank you to the No Till Growers Board of Directors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at no-tillgrowers.com to support this work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of August, you get a shout on the show. So big shout outs today to, it's a mystery because I forgot to pull them up, Mike McFeederson. Oh, that's a fun name, Mike. I'm not sure if it's real, but it is fun. Anyway, this week's story that Mike is kicking off, we have a farmer named Jill. Now, originally, Jill thought she would just be a flower farmer, and sure, her farm does produce some flowers because they're super profitable, but Jill's real passion is not a crop at all. It's her hedgerows. She has these large, flowery, bushy, wild hedgerows that line all plots of her garden, and they mean more to Jill than anything. She really, really loves them. The snakes and the turtles and the birds and the bugs and the flowers and all the things. To Jill, these are the heartbeat of the farm. They just call to her. And then one day, something she finds makes her wonder if they really are sort of the heartbeat. But that is for tomorrow. Sign up spending on hedging her bets. I don't know, it was really the only thing I could come up with hedging. Or is it? Yep. Thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.